What happens when a judge casually mutters life at a 17-year-old over a school fight, and the boy's father turns out to be the U.S. Attorney General? Life. That one word cut through the air like a knife. Everyone in the courtroom heard it, though no one was sure if they were supposed to. Judge Raymond Whitlock leaned slightly forward on the bench, his voice low, but heavy enough that it carried. His eyes stayed locked on the 17-year-old sitting at the defense table, a boy with his whole future at stake. The room fell silent. No one moved. For a moment, it was as if time stalled, and all anyone could think about was what they had just heard. Life. Malik Johnson sat rigid in his chair, his fingers clutching the edge of the worn wooden table. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He wasn't some repeat offender. He was just a teenager, a high school junior who had been caught in a fight in the school parking lot in Macon, Georgia. Two boys throwing punches after weeks of tension. Nothing about it screamed life in prison, but the word hung there, heavier than the thick air in the courtroom. Malik's mother, Denise Johnson, gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. People seated behind her exchanged looks, shock, confusion, anger. At the defense table, Malik's public defender, Andrea Lewis, blinked hard, snapping her head toward the judge. "Your Honor," she stammered, "with all due respect, I need clarification. Did you say life?" Judge Whitlock didn't answer right away. His expression remained flat, almost unreadable. He shifted in his chair, then cleared his throat, as if the word had slipped out unintentionally. "We'll return to sentencing after recess," he said abruptly, rapping his gavel once. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose all at once. Family members crying, reporters whispering into their phones, even jurors shaking their heads as they filed out. The deputies moved quickly to restore order, escorting the judge out of the chamber. Malik's chest tightened. He could feel his heart thudding in his ears. Life? He was 17. He had college dreams, a basketball season he'd worked all year for, a family that depended on him. And yet, with one careless, or maybe deliberate, word, a judge had made it sound like his future was already sealed shut. His mom grabbed his shoulder as he was led back toward the holding area. "Baby, don't you let this man break you," she said through tears. "Don't you let him decide who you are." Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Mom," he whispered. "He said life." Andrea Lewis caught up with them, her face pale. "Listen, Malik, we need to stay calm. Judges sometimes—" She stopped, shook her head, and lowered her voice. "I've never seen anything like this. Not for a school fight. Not like this." Inside the small holding room off the courtroom, Malik sat on the bench, his knees bouncing uncontrollably. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the deputies who shot him irritated looks. His hands shook as he scrolled to a contact he almost never called directly. "Dad." The word came out as a whisper, almost like a plea. He hit the button. The line rang once, twice. Then a deep, steady voice answered. "Malik? Son, what's going on? I'm in Washington. You okay?" Malik pressed the phone tight against his ear, his eyes filling with tears he didn't want to show. "Dad, he said life." Judge Whitlock. He looked me dead in the face and said it. There was silence on the other end, a silence that stretched long enough for Malik to worry his father hadn't heard him. Then the voice returned, harder, sharper. "He said what?" "Life, Dad." Like that's what I deserve. Over a fight. Just a fight Malik could hear shuffling on the other end. Papers being moved, a chair scraping against the floor. His father was no longer just a dad. He was stepping into something else. "Listen to me, Malik," U.S. Attorney General Nathaniel Johnson said firmly. "Stay calm. Do not let anyone intimidate you. I'm coming down there." Malik closed his eyes, relief and fear colliding all at once. For Denise, the weight of the moment was crushing. She pressed her hand to her forehead, whispering prayers under her breath. Andrea Lewis paced, muttering, "This is going to blow up." I can feel it. Malik opened his eyes again, staring at the blank wall in front of him. His father was on his way, the most powerful prosecutor in the nation. And the judge who had muttered that word, life, was about to be held accountable in a way he probably never expected. But outside that holding room, whispers were already starting to spread through the courthouse, and soon, nothing about this case would stay local. What happens when a judge casually mutters life at a 17-year-old over a school fight, and the boy's father turns out to be the U.S. Attorney General? Life. That one word cut through the air like a knife. Everyone in the courtroom heard it, though no one was sure if they were supposed to. Judge Raymond Whitlock leaned slightly forward on the bench, his voice low, but heavy enough that it carried. His eyes stayed locked on the 17-year-old sitting at the defense table, a boy with his whole future at stake. The room fell silent. No one moved. For a moment, it was as if time stalled, and all anyone could think about was what they had just heard. Life? Malik Johnson sat rigid in his chair, his fingers clutching the edge of the worn wooden table. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He wasn't some repeat offender. He was just a teenager, a high school junior, who had been caught in a fight in the school parking lot in Macon, Georgia. Two boys throwing punches after weeks of tension. Nothing about it screamed life in prison. But the word hung there, heavier than the thick air in the courtroom. Malik's mother, Denise Johnson, gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. People seated behind her exchanged looks, shock, confusion, anger. At the defense table, Malik's public defender, Andrea Lewis, blinked hard, snapping her head toward the judge. "Your Honor," she stammered, "with all due respect, I need clarification." Did you say life?" Judge Whitlock didn't answer right away. His expression remained flat, almost unreadable. He shifted in his chair, then cleared his throat, as if the word had slipped out unintentionally. "We'll return to sentencing after recess," he said abruptly, rapping his gavel once. The courtroom erupted, voices rose all at once. Family members crying, reporters whispering into their phones, even jurors shaking their heads as they filed out. The deputies moved quickly to restore order, escorting the judge out of the chamber. Malik's chest tightened. He could feel his heart thudding in his ears. Life? He was 17. He had college dreams, a basketball season he'd worked all year for, a family that depended on him. And yet, with one careless, or maybe deliberate, word, a judge had made it sound like his future was already sealed shut. His mom grabbed his shoulder as he was led back toward the holding area. "Baby, don't you let this man break you," she said through tears. "Don't you let him decide who you are." Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Mom," he whispered, "he said life." Andrea Lewis caught up with them, her face pale. "Listen, Malik, we need to stay calm. Judges sometimes—" She stopped, shook her head, and lowered her voice. "I've never seen anything like this. Not for a school fight. Not like this." Inside the small holding room off the courtroom, Malik sat on the bench, his knees bouncing uncontrollably. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the deputies who shot him irritated looks. His hands shook as he scrolled to a contact he almost never called directly. "Dad." The word came out as a whisper, almost like a plea. He hit the button. The line rang once, twice, then a deep, steady voice answered. "Malik? Son, what's going on? I'm in Washington. You okay?" Malik pressed the phone tight against his ear, his eyes filling with tears he didn't want to show. "Dad, he said life. Judge Whitlock." He looked me dead in the face and said it. There was silence on the other end, a silence that stretched long enough for Malik to worry his father hadn't heard him. Then the voice returned, harder, sharper. "He said what?" "Life, Dad. Like that's what I deserve. Over a fight. Just a fight." Malik could hear shuffling on the other end, papers being moved, a chair scraping against the floor. His father was no longer just a dad. He was stepping into something else. "Listen to me, Malik," U.S. Attorney General Nathaniel Johnson said firmly. "Stay calm. Do not let anyone intimidate you. I'm coming down there." Malik closed his eyes, relief and fear colliding all at once. For Denise, the weight of the moment was crushing. She pressed her hand to her forehead, whispering prayers under her breath. Andrea Lewis paced, muttering, "This is going to blow up. I can feel it." Malik opened his eyes again, staring at the blank wall in front of him. His father was on his way, the most powerful prosecutor in the nation, and the judge, who had muttered that word, life, was about to be held accountable in a way he probably never expected. But outside that holding room, whispers were already starting to spread through the courthouse, and soon, nothing about this case would stay local. The hallway outside courtroom 4B had turned into a stage. Reporters clutched notepads and phones, courthouse staff tried to appear calm, and family members from other cases leaned against the walls, whispering about what they had overheard. The word life had spread like wildfire, passed from one mouth to another until no one was quite sure whether they'd heard it themselves or absorbed it from the crowd. "Did you hear it too?" one woman asked her husband as they left the cafeteria. "Clear as day," he replied. "That judge said life. About a kid, 17 years old, over a fight. Can you imagine?" Down the hall, a pair of reporters debated how to frame the story before going live on social media. "We don't have official confirmation yet," one of them said, adjusting his tie nervously. "If we put this out there without context, it could blow up in the wrong way." The other shook her head. "It's already blowing up. Half this building is talking about it. Either we report it or someone else will." Inside the courtroom, people filtered back to their seats. The hum of conversations quieted as the bailiff called for order. Denise Johnson sat stiffly on the wooden bench, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Every few seconds, she glanced at the doors, waiting for her son to reappear. When Malik was led back into the room, shackled at the wrists, the chatter died altogether. He didn't bow his head this time. He walked steadily, shoulders straight, eyes fixed ahead. Andrea Lewis walked beside him, a quiet fire in her step. Denise leaned forward. "Baby, remember what your father said," she whispered when he passed by. Malik gave her a small nod before sitting down. The court reconvened, but the tension hadn't left. If anything, it had grown thicker. Judge Whitlock re-entered from chambers, his expression stony. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We will continue with sentencing considerations. The court reminds all present that decorum must be maintained." Andrea rose immediately. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to place on the record that the defendant, his family, and multiple members of this courtroom heard you state the word life during the last session." Gasps echoed across the benches. Andrea continued, her voice unwavering. "That comment, whether intended as a statement or not, creates a presumption of bias in this proceeding. For the integrity of this court, I move for recusal." Judge Whitlock's jaw flexed. "Ms. Lewis, are you suggesting that this court cannot act impartially?" "I'm not suggesting," Andrea fired back. "I'm saying the record already shows that impartiality is in question." Denise squeezed her hands tighter, her heart pounding. All around, the audience leaned forward, waiting for Whitlock's response. But the judge didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped his pen against the bench. Once, twice, finally he spoke. "The motion is noted. We will address it after recess tomorrow. Court is adjourned for the day." The gavel slammed, but it wasn't enough to quiet the noise that erupted. Voices rose, chairs scraped against the floor, and phones shot into the air as reporters tried to capture the chaos. Deputies scrambled to escort the judge out quickly. Denise stood and reached for her son, but deputies pulled Malik toward the exit. "Mom," he called out, his voice cracking. "I'm right here, baby," Denise shouted back. Her chest ached with every step that took him farther away. Andrea grabbed Denise's arm. "This isn't over. Do you hear me? This is just the beginning." In the lobby, the reporters finally broke their silence. Microphones were thrust toward anyone willing to speak. One clerk, pale and visibly shaken, admitted, "Yes, I heard it." He said, "Life." Another courthouse employee muttered under her breath as cameras swung toward her. "I'm not supposed to say anything, but everybody knows Judge Whitlock's record." Within an hour, local television stations in Macon and Columbus were running breaking news banners. Judge's remarks sparks outrage at courthouse. At a gas station 10 miles away, a truck driver leaned against the counter watching the news on a small mounted TV. A 17-year-old? Life? Man, that's crazy. The cashier nodded, replying, "You think people in Washington are going to let that slide? Not when it's the Attorney General's kid." By evening, the courthouse steps were crowded. Protesters held handwritten signs, "Fair trial for all, stop judicial bias," while others simply stood, holding candles in silence. Reporters weaved between them, giving live updates into cameras. Denise watched from the window of her car, parked across the street. She could hardly believe this was happening. Hours ago, her son was just another case number on a docket. Now he was the face of something far larger than their family. Andrea sat in the passenger seat, typing furiously on her laptop. "They're calling it the Whitlock remark," she said, "and by tomorrow morning, it'll be everywhere." Denise's voice trembled. "Do you think Nathaniel knows?" Andrea looked up. "Trust me, He knows, and when he gets here, this courthouse won't know what hit it. But for now, the whispers were only growing louder, and by dawn, the entire country would be watching what happened inside courtroom 4B. The next morning, the courthouse in Macon felt different. News vans lined the street, bright lights from camera crews washed over the old stone steps. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding signs, others chanting, while deputies struggled to keep a clear path for people entering the building. Inside, tension clung to every corner. Clerks whispered nervously, deputies stood stiffer than usual, and even the court reporters looked uneasy. Everyone knew today wouldn't be like yesterday. Then the doors opened. Attorney General Nathaniel Johnson walked in, flanked by 2 aides. He wasn't wearing his usual Washington suit, but a simple dark blazer, crisp white shirt, and tie. Yet, even without the trappings of power, his presence was commanding. Conversations hushed, heads turned, cameras clicked furiously as he strode down the hallway. Denise, already waiting inside, caught sight of him and exhaled in relief. She squeezed Andrea's hand. "He's here," she whispered. Andrea adjusted her files. Good. Because this judge is about to feel pressure he's never felt before. When the bailiff called the court to order, the room filled quickly. Protesters outside pressed against the windows, their chants muffled but still audible. Judge Whitlock entered from chambers, his robe swaying as he settled into his chair. His expression was controlled, but the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. He glanced toward the gallery, and there sat Nathaniel Johnson, front row, eyes fixed firmly on him. Whitlock cleared his throat. "We are here to address motions regarding yesterday's proceedings. Counsel, proceed." Andrea rose, steady as stone. "Your Honor, the defense renews its motion for recusal. This court's impartiality has already been compromised by your statement yesterday. The defendant, his family, and multiple members of this room heard you say life before any sentencing determination had been made. That remark cannot be erased." Whitlock's voice tightened. "Counsel, I did not issue a sentence. My words were misinterpreted." At that, Nathaniel Johnson stood. The gallery rustled as people leaned forward, cameras from the media section clicking nonstop. "Your Honor," Nathaniel said, his voice clear, firm, but respectful. "I am here today as both the father of the defendant and as the Attorney General of the United States. And I must tell you, when a judge even hints at a predetermined sentence, it undermines not just this case, but the very credibility of our justice system." The room erupted with murmurs. Whitlock rapped his gavel sharply. "Mr. Johnson, this is highly irregular. You are not counsel of record." Nathaniel's gaze never wavered. "Irregular? Yes, but necessary, because when a young man's life is at stake, when my son's life is at stake, and a judge mutters the word life before arguments are finished, irregular becomes essential." Denise's chest swelled with pride, tears brimming in her eyes. Malik, seated beside Andrea, stared at his father with awe. Whitlock leaned back, his knuckles white around the gavel. "The court does not answer to political pressure, Mr. Johnson, nor does it bend to the will of media frenzy." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping but carrying even more weight. "This isn't about politics. This isn't about cameras. This is about fairness. And if this court cannot provide that, then I will ensure another does." Gasps swept the room. Whitlock's face flushed. "Are you threatening the authority of this bench?" "No," Nathaniel said calmly. "I'm reminding you that authority is not above accountability. Judges serve justice, not themselves. And when justice is compromised, it is my duty to act." Andrea placed a hand on Malik's arm. "Watch this closely," she whispered. "This is history in motion." The judge tried to regain control. "Court will recess for 1 hour," he barked, slamming the gavel before retreating to his chambers. The room exploded, reporters darting for the doors, family members crying out, protesters outside chanting louder as word spread. Nathaniel turned to Denise and Malik. "This isn't over." He's shaken. He knows he crossed the line. "Now we keep the pressure on," Malik whispered. "Dad, thank you." Nathaniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't thank me yet. This fight is just beginning." But outside those walls, the media storm was only getting louder. And soon, the story wouldn't just be about a judge. It would be about a nation watching itself in the mirror. By noon, the courthouse had become the epicenter of a national frenzy. Satellite trucks lined both sides of Mulberry Street, their antennas raised high into the gray Georgia sky. Reporters from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and even international outlets had descended, fighting for position. The chants from protesters carried into every live broadcast, and the phrase "the Whitlock remark" had already gone viral on social media. Inside a diner 2 miles away, the television over the counter flickered with breaking news banners. A group of locals leaned in, coffee mugs in hand, as the screen showed footage of Nathaniel Johnson confronting Judge Whitlock. One man shook his head. "That's the Attorney General himself, coming down here for his son." A woman across the booth replied, "It's bigger than his son now." That judge slipped, and everybody knows it. Back at the courthouse, Andrea Lewis fielded questions from a swarm of reporters the moment she stepped outside. Microphones crowded her face, voices firing in rapid succession. Did the judge actually say the word life before the hearing ended? Do you think racial bias played a role in this case? What does the Attorney General's presence mean for the trial moving forward? Andrea lifted her hands, urging calm. This case is about fairness. A 17-year-old boy deserves the same impartial treatment as anyone else in this country. What happened yesterday raised serious questions, and we're demanding answers. She didn't confirm or deny bias, didn't give them the soundbite they wanted. But it didn't matter. The cameras had what they needed, an image of a small-town public defender standing shoulder to shoulder with the nation's top prosecutor, both fighting for a teenager caught in the system. Meanwhile, inside the holding room, Malik sat with his mother. The muffled chants from protesters outside bled through the walls. Denise stroked his hand, her voice soft but steady. "You see what's happening out there? You're not alone in this. People care. People are watching." Malik's voice cracked. "I didn't want all this, Mom. I just wanted to finish school, play ball. Now it feels like my whole life is on trial." She squeezed his hand tighter. "Sometimes we don't choose the fight. The fight chooses us. And when it does, we don't back down." Out in Washington, the story was unavoidable. On Capitol Hill, senators gave hurried interviews in marble hallways, some calling Whitlock's remark disgraceful, others dismissing the uproar as political theater. On cable news, panels of commentators debated what had happened. One host replayed the video of Nathaniel Johnson standing in court, his voice unwavering as he challenged the judge. "This is unprecedented," the anchor said. The sitting attorney general publicly confronting a state judge over his own son's case. Some say it's personal bias. Others argue it's his moral duty. Either way, this is now a national crisis of confidence in the justice system. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Whitlock. Remark. Hashtag Justice for Malik. Hashtag Courtroom Bias. Teenagers on TikTok stitched videos of Malik walking into court, set to music, framing him as both victim and symbol. Activists tweeted threads about systemic injustice. Within hours, everyone from college students to celebrities had weighed in. At the courthouse steps, a protester with a bullhorn shouted, 17 years old, and they wanted to throw his life away. We will not stay silent." Cheers erupted, echoing down the street. Nathaniel stood near the courthouse doors, taking it all in. An aide approached him. "Sir, the networks want you for interviews. Every major outlet is requesting you on air tonight." He shook his head. "This isn't about sound bites. It's about accountability. My son isn't a prop for politics." The aide pressed. "But the public pressure could turn the tide." "If you speak," Nathaniel cut him off. "The court is where this fight happens. Not cable news, not Twitter. Right here inside," Andrea whispered to Malik. "Your father's presence changes everything. But it also paints a target on his back. Judges don't like being challenged, especially not by someone in his position." Malik swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" Andrea leaned closer, her voice low. "Now, we brace ourselves. The judge is cornered. He'll either double down or crack under the spotlight." The hour recess stretched into 2 as Whitlock remained in chambers. Rumors flew. Some said he was furious. Others claimed he was drafting a statement. Still others whispered about calls being made from the governor's office. When Whitlock finally reappeared, his face was pale, his jaw tight. He cleared his throat and said only, "This court will reconvene tomorrow morning." Then he stood and left, his robe sweeping behind him. The courtroom erupted again. Reporters dashed for the exits. Protesters outside shouted louder, and Denise clutched her son, whispering, "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." But the storm wasn't dying down. It was spreading, pulling in the whole country, and soon the question wouldn't just be about one boy in Georgia. It would be about whether justice itself still meant the same thing for everyone. By the next morning, the courthouse no longer belonged to Macon. It belonged to America. Satellite trucks stretched down the block, their cables snaking across sidewalks. Protesters camped overnight, holding signs and chanting in shifts so the noise never fully died. And the moment Judge Whitlock's gavel hit wood again, every word spoken inside 4B would ripple through the airwaves to living rooms across the country. Inside, the tension was electric. Denise sat on the front bench, clutching a small Bible in her lap. Andrea Lewis shuffled papers but kept glancing at the gallery, where reporters typed furiously into laptops. Malik sat stiffly between two deputies, his shoulders squared, his face unreadable. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Whitlock stepped in, his robe flowing, his expression carefully composed. Yet everyone noticed the slight delay before he sat, the tiny hesitation that betrayed the pressure bearing down on him. Whitlock's voice was measured. "We reconvene to address motions regarding this case. This court has considered the defense's request for recusal, as well as the matters raised yesterday." Andrea stood instantly. "Your Honor, before you proceed, I'd like to submit additional documentation, a transcript of yesterday's proceedings, witness statements from multiple attendees, and affidavits confirming that the word life was spoken before sentencing arguments had concluded." She walked the papers up confidently, placing them on the clerk's desk. Reporters scribbled faster. Cameras flashed. Whitlock leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Ms. Lewis, are you implying that this court has predetermined its sentence?" Andrea didn't flinch. "I'm not implying. I'm showing. The evidence speaks for itself." At that moment, Nathaniel Johnson rose from his seat in the gallery. His voice was calm, yet every syllable carried like thunder. "Your Honor, I will remind this court that my son has the same constitutional rights as any other citizen. This case is not only about Malik Johnson. It is about whether the words spoken in this courtroom uphold or betray those rights." The gallery buzzed with murmurs until Whitlock slammed his gavel. "Order!" His face flushed red. "This court will not be lectured by political officials." Nathaniel didn't blink. "Then let me speak as a father. If the word life was not meant as a sentence, then say so. Say it here, on the record, in front of every person in this room." The silence was deafening. Every reporter leaned forward, pens poised. Even the deputies shifted uneasily. Whitlock's lips parted, then closed again. He tapped his gavel once more, though softer this time. "This court acknowledges that the remark may have been misinterpreted. No sentence has been decided. Proceedings will continue." The words sounded hollow, but they landed like a crack in armor, the first real concession. Andrea seized the moment. "Then let the record show, Your Honor, that the defense demands a fair evaluation of the facts. Malik Johnson is not a violent offender. He is a high school student with no prior record, facing charges stemming from a schoolyard altercation. To speak of life before arguments are concluded is not only prejudicial, it's an injustice." The judge shifted uncomfortably. Cameras clicked. From the back row, a voice called out, "Let the boy live his life." Deputies moved quickly to silence the interruption, but the words had already stuck. Malik sat frozen, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He could feel the eyes of the entire room on him. He wasn't just Malik anymore. He was a symbol, and symbols carry weight. Nathaniel leaned toward Denise, whispering, "The tide is turning." "He's trying to pull back," Denise whispered back. "But is it enough?" The day dragged on with testimony. Teachers testified Malik had never been a troublemaker. A guidance counselor described him as respectful, a leader on the basketball court. Even the boy he fought with admitted under oath that the altercation got out of hand but was never intended to escalate. Andrea pressed the point relentlessly. This is not a case of violence deserving the maximum penalty. This is a case of two boys whose tempers flared. To treat it otherwise is to distort justice. By afternoon, it was clear the momentum had shifted. Reporters outside broadcast live updates with words like unprecedented and turning point. Protesters cheered when they heard Whitlock backpedal on his remark. Still, the judge's face revealed little. He ended the day with clipped words. "Court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Until then, proceedings are adjourned." The gavel struck, but the sound no longer carried the same weight. As Malik was led away, Denise caught his eye. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. It was small, but it was real. Andrea packed her files, her voice low but firm. We're closer than we were yesterday. Tomorrow matters more than anything. Nathaniel stood, shaking hands with supporters in the gallery, but his eyes stayed locked on the bench where Whitlock had sat. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But outside, the crowd was swelling larger than ever, and by tomorrow, the courthouse would be surrounded not just by protesters, but by a nation waiting to see if justice would finally be done. The final day drew the largest crowd yet. The courthouse steps were nearly impassable, swarmed with protesters holding signs, chanting for fairness, and waiting for a verdict that had grown far bigger than one boy's future. News anchors stood in front of cameras, their voices urgent. Closing arguments begin today in the Johnson case, where Judge Raymond Whitlock's controversial remark continues to send shockwaves across the nation. Inside courtroom 4B, every bench was filled. The air buzzed with nervous energy as spectators shifted in their seats. Malik sat at the defense table, hands folded, his eyes steady. He looked older than 17, the weight of the past days etched into his face. Denise sat directly behind him, clutching her Bible once more, her lips moving in silent prayer. Nathaniel sat beside her, his jaw set in determination. Andrea Lewis rose for the defense's closing. She paced slowly, her voice deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about excusing a mistake. It's not about pretending a fight didn't happen. It did. But this case is also not about treating a boy like a hardened criminal for one mistake. Malik Johnson is not a threat to society. He is not someone who should be branded for life. He is a 17-year-old who has a future. He deserves a chance to live it. She paused, letting her words sink in. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. Andrea turned toward Judge Whitlock. Yesterday, Your Honor, you acknowledged that your words, life, may have been misinterpreted. That acknowledgement matters. But today, the decision you make will matter even more. The entire country is watching. The question is simple. Will this court choose punishment beyond reason, or will it choose fairness? Malik's eyes welled, but he blinked the tears back. He wanted to look strong, not broken. The prosecutor gave his closing next, insisting that the fight had endangered others, that order must be preserved. But his voice lacked its earlier bite. Even he seemed to recognize the tide had shifted. When the arguments ended, silence fell. Judge Whitlock leaned back, his eyes scanning the room. His face betrayed nothing. He adjusted his glasses, then spoke. This court recognizes the seriousness of altercations on school grounds. However, this court also recognizes that sentencing must reflect fairness, not prejudice. After reviewing the testimony, the evidence, and the character of the defendant, this court sentences Malik Johnson to 12 months probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. No incarceration. The words hung in the air. For a split second, no one moved. Then Denise cried out, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, clutching Malik tightly as deputies removed his restraints. Reporters bolted for the doors, already shouting updates into their phones. Protesters outside erupted when they heard the news, their cheers echoing through the streets. Malik turned to his father, his voice breaking. "Dad, I'm free." Nathaniel gripped his son's shoulders. "You're free. But remember, freedom means responsibility. This isn't just about you anymore." Andrea exhaled deeply, relief washing over her face. "We did it," she murmured. "But make no mistake, this isn't the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning." As the family exited the courtroom, cameras flashed wildly. Reporters hurled questions. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel about the verdict? Will the Attorney General push for reforms? Malik, what's next for you?" Nathaniel raised a hand. Today was about one young man. Tomorrow, it must be about every young man and woman who faces the same system. Justice should never depend on who your father is. It should be fair for everyone. Malik, his voice shaky but firm, added, "I made a mistake, but I learned something. If we don't speak up, if we don't stand strong, the system decides for us, and I won't let that happen." The crowd cheered. Cameras caught every word. That night, the images replayed on every news channel. A judge conceding under pressure, a family reunited, a nation forced to confront its reflection in one courtroom. And for Malik, the lesson was carved deep. He realized that his father's presence had changed everything, but it was the voices outside, the protesters, the reporters, the people who refused to stay silent, that turned the tide. In his room later, he told his mom quietly, "It's not just about me anymore, is it?" Denise smiled through tears. "No, baby. It's about every kid who's ever felt powerless. You just showed them what standing up looks like." Nathaniel stood in the doorway, arms folded. "Remember this, Malik. Power doesn't come from titles. It comes from courage, from speaking when it's hard, from refusing to accept injustice. That's the lesson here." Malik nodded, his voice steady. "Then that's the life I want to live." The moral is clear. Justice should never be selective, and silence only feeds injustice. Speaking up, even when it's risky, can change the outcome, not just for one person, but for many. And to the viewer, if this story moved you, if it made you think about fairness and the power of one voice, subscribe to this channel. Because these are the stories that matter. Stories that remind us all of the kind of world we want to live in.